I never thought I'd find myself facing betrayal under my own roof, but sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. My name is Evelyn, I'm 72 years old. And I've spent most of my life in the quiet suburbs of Ohio. I've seen a lot in my years, raised 3 kids, buried my husband, and built a life full of memories, love, and a few regrets. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened when my daughter-in-law, Karen, tried to take something that wasn't hers. Before I tell you what happened next, would you do me a favor? Hit that subscribe button, turn on the little bell, and let me know where you're watching from. It really helps us know where these stories are reaching. It all started on a Saturday morning, one of those crisp fall days when the air smells like change, and everything feels just a little bit fresher. I was sipping my coffee by the window, the sunlight just starting to peek through the trees outside, casting soft shadows across my living room. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Life had become a gentle rhythm for me: morning coffee, the crossword puzzle, and then a bit of knitting before lunch. Karen came over that morning, as she often did. She was friendly enough, always with a smile and a kind word. I'd known her since she married my son, Jason, 10 years ago. She'd never been anything but polite, and I had welcomed her into my family with open arms. She had her own style, a bit flashy for my taste, but I figured it was the modern way. I remember that morning vividly. Karen was sitting across from me, fiddling with her phone, when I noticed it. The gleam in her eye, just for a split second, as she glanced at the jewelry box on the table beside me. The box, an heirloom passed down from my mother, contained my most prized possessions: gold rings, a locket, and the delicate bracelet my husband gave me for our 25th wedding anniversary. For a brief moment, I saw her glance at it, then quickly avert her gaze. I thought nothing of it at first. But later, when she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had no proof, but my gut told me that something wasn't right, and then it happened. A few days later, when I was rummaging through the box to find my favorite ring for an outing, I noticed something strange. The bracelet was missing. My heart sank. I checked the box again, then checked it once more. But it was gone. I had no concrete proof, but my gut told me Karen had something to do with it. I remembered the way she had looked at the box that morning, her eyes too focused for just a passing glance. It wasn't like her to take something like that, or at least I thought I knew her well enough to trust her, but now, I wasn't so sure. I had to get to the bottom of this. But how? What could I do? I'd raised my son to trust his wife, and I didn't want to make a fuss without knowing the truth. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being taken advantage of. Was this some sort of test? Or worse, had Karen been planning something bigger all along? But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to sit around and let this slide. It wasn't until that one evening when everything came to a head. I'd been trying to move on with my days, but my mind kept drifting back to the missing bracelet. I even tried to convince myself it might have been misplaced. Maybe I'd taken it off somewhere and forgotten where I left it. But deep down, I knew the truth. That night, Jason had gone out for a work dinner, and I was alone in the house, the soft glow of the kitchen light spilling over the countertop where I sat. It was after dinner, and I'd settled into my favorite chair with a cup of tea. The house was quiet again, the kind of peaceful silence that makes you feel like you're the only one in the world. I was lost in thought when I heard the faintest sound, a rustling in the hallway. At first, I brushed it off. But then, it came again, this time followed by the soft click of the door to my bedroom. It was almost as if someone was tiptoeing around, trying to be as quiet as possible. My heart skipped a beat. Karen. She had stopped by earlier in the day, saying she had left something in the guest room. I hadn't thought much of it, but now the timing seemed too perfect. I got up from my chair, the old wood creaking beneath me, and moved quietly to the hallway. I didn't want to make any noise. Peering around the corner, I saw her, Karen, standing in my room, her back turned to me. She was near the jewelry box. I couldn't believe my eyes. There she was, lifting the lid, looking inside. My stomach churned. She was taking her time, almost too casually, as if she had every right to be there. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The seconds dragged on like hours. But then, as if sensing something wasn't right, Karen quickly snapped the lid of the jewelry box shut and turned toward the door. Our eyes met for just a split second, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. In that moment, I knew. She had been taking the bracelet. There was no other explanation, but I wasn't about to confront her just yet. No, I had learned from my years of experience that rushing into a confrontation without proof would only make me look foolish. I needed something solid, something I could use to make her admit it. I stepped back, careful not to make a sound. I needed to wait until I had more to go on, but I couldn't let this go. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's act of betrayal wasn't just about the jewelry. There was something deeper at play here, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I knew I had to act quickly. If she was willing to steal from me once, what else might she be capable of? But how could I gather the proof I needed without tipping her off? I thought about the receipts, the pictures. Anything that could give me what I needed to confront her without any doubt. It was a gamble. But I had to play it. The next few days were a blur. As I tried to gather my thoughts and figure out my next move. Every time I saw Karen, I felt a knot in my stomach. She was still acting normal, still charming and polite, but I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I kept thinking about that night, how she stood there in my room. Her hands so carefully placed over my things, but something changed that afternoon. I was sitting in the kitchen, my usual cup of tea in hand, when I heard a soft knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I opened it to find my neighbor, Miss Ellen, standing there. She's one of those women who always knows everything that's going on, even before you do. She's in her late 60s, and though she doesn't have much to do these days, she's sharp as a tack. "Afternoon, Evelyn," she said with a warm smile. "Mind if I come in for a minute? I've got a little something for you." I stepped aside, and she walked in, holding a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked, curious. "Well, I was just over at the post office, and I ran into Jason's old friend, Mark. He told me something you might want to hear about. Thought I should pass it along." I raised an eyebrow, but I didn't say anything. Miss Ellen wasn't the type to gossip aimlessly. She always had something important to say. She handed me the envelope, which I opened carefully. Inside was a photocopy of a receipt. At first, I didn't understand. It was a receipt from a pawn shop on the other side of town. The date was just a few days ago. My heart skipped a beat as I read the details. An item listed: gold bracelet, worn, slight tarnish, $200. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The bracelet. The one that had gone missing from my jewelry box. My fingers shook as I held the receipt, and a cold wave of realization swept over me. Karen hadn't just looked at my jewelry, she had taken it and sold it. "Sold it? How did you get this?" I whispered, almost to myself. Miss Ellen chuckled softly. "Well, I didn't exactly get it on purpose. Mark's wife works at the pawn shop. She saw Karen come in with that bracelet. When Mark told me, I thought you'd like to know." I stood there, holding the receipt in my hand, the weight of it sinking in. My first instinct was to march right over to Karen's house and confront her, but I knew that wasn't the right move. Not yet. I needed more. This wasn't just about the bracelet anymore. It was about trust that had been shattered. I thanked Miss Ellen, still in shock, and promised to call her later. As she left, I sat down at the kitchen table, the receipt in front of me like some kind of cruel joke. It was real. Karen had done this, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I had what I needed to start the process of bringing this to light, but I wasn't sure yet how to do it. There were too many moving pieces, too many feelings involved. I had to tread carefully. Still, I knew one thing: this wasn't going to end quietly. I couldn't help but think, what else had she done behind closed doors? What other secrets was she hiding? The days following Miss Ellen's visit were full of quiet tension. I didn't want to make any rash moves, but the more I thought about Karen's actions, the more certain I became that she had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. My thoughts circled back to that moment I'd seen her standing in my room, how she had tried to hide what she was doing, the way her eyes flickered when she realized I was watching. She must have thought I didn't notice, but I had noticed, and now I had proof. It was time to confront her, but I couldn't bring myself to just walk up to her and accuse her outright. No, that wasn't my way. I wanted her to admit it, to face the truth without any more lies. But how would I get her to do that? I thought about all the years I had spent trying to keep peace in the family, all the times I'd swallowed my words to avoid conflict. Not anymore. It was Friday evening when I decided to go through with it. Jason had called earlier to let me know he'd be working late, so I knew Karen would be home alone. I made myself a light dinner, just a salad, and sat at the table, mentally preparing for what was coming. I knew I couldn't keep waiting, but my heart was heavy. This was family, after all, and confronting her was the last thing I wanted to do, but it had to be done. Around 7 p.m., I drove over to Karen's house. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual, and my stomach churned with nerves. When I got to her front door, I hesitated for a moment, then rang the bell. A moment later, she opened the door, a wide smile on her face. "Evelyn. What brings you here?" she asked, her voice chipper. I smiled back, but there was no warmth in it. "Can I come in for a moment? There's something we need to talk about." She looked a little taken aback, but stepped aside to let me in. I followed her through the front hallway, the same one I had walked through so many times before. But tonight, everything felt different. She led me to the living room, and I sat down, my heart pounding. "Evelyn, what's going on? You seem a little off," she said, sitting across from me, her legs crossed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Karen, I've been thinking a lot about something lately. About the bracelet I had, the one that went missing." Her face didn't change, but I could see her shift slightly in her seat, a small nervous tick. "Evelyn, I really don't know what you mean. That bracelet, what do you think happened to it?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of discomfort. I pulled the receipt from my bag, the one Miss Ellen had given me, and placed it on the coffee table between us. "I think you know exactly what happened to it. I think you sold it." Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw a flash of panic. But then she quickly regained her composure, leaning forward slightly. "What? I would never. I don't even know what you're talking about." Her voice was sharp now, defensive. I wasn't backing down. "I have a receipt from the pawn shop, Karen. I know you took it and sold it. And I know it wasn't just about the jewelry. There's something more going on here. What else have you been hiding?" She stood up quickly, her face flushing with anger. "You've got it all wrong, Evelyn. This is ridiculous. I didn't take anything, and you have no right to accuse me like this." I stood too, slowly, my hands trembling. "I have every right to accuse you. You've been lying to me, Karen. And I won't stand for it anymore. Not from family. Not from anyone." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The tension in the room was palpable. She was standing there, her arms crossed, clearly trying to maintain control. But I knew what I had to do. "You've crossed a line, Karen," I said, my voice firm. "I don't know what your reasons were, but I can't pretend this didn't happen. You've hurt me, and you've hurt this family." She didn't answer me. Instead, she turned away, pacing for a few moments before stopping at the window. I could see her shoulders slumped, like the weight of everything finally settling in. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said softly, almost to herself. "I was just desperate." It wasn't the apology I was expecting, but it was something. I couldn't bring myself to say anything else. The truth was out now, and I wasn't sure how to fix things. What would happen to the family after this? Would they stand by me, or would they take her side? But I knew one thing, this was just the beginning. It was hard to sleep that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing. The confrontation with Karen had left me with more questions than answers. Yes, I had the truth now, or at least part of it. She admitted to taking the bracelet, but she hadn't told me why. "Desperation," she said. But desperation for what? The next morning, I woke up early, the sky still dark, the house as quiet as it had been the night before. I made my usual pot of coffee, but it didn't taste the same today. Something was off. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Karen wasn't just after the jewelry. There was something deeper, something that went beyond her need for money. As I sipped my coffee, my mind kept returning to that night when I'd confronted her. The way she'd looked, guilty, but also scared. Like there was more she wasn't telling me. I knew Karen well enough to understand that she wasn't the type to steal something just for the sake of it. She had always seemed to have everything under control. But now, I couldn't help but wonder what she was hiding. I decided to pay her another visit, but not right away. I had to be smart about this. I knew I couldn't push her too hard, or she'd close up entirely. So, I spent the day gathering my thoughts and preparing for whatever came next. Around 4 p.m., I drove over to Karen's house again. This time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't looking for a confrontation. I was looking for answers. When I arrived, she was sitting on the front porch, sipping something from a mug, staring out at the yard. She didn't notice me at first, and I almost hesitated to approach her. But I knew I had to. "Karen," I called softly, stepping onto the porch. She looked up, startled, but quickly masked her expression. "Evelyn, I didn't expect to see you again so soon." I smiled, though it didn't feel genuine. "I know. I wanted to come by and talk some more. About everything. She sighed, setting her mug down on the table beside her. Evelyn, I really don't know what else to say. I already told you, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. I sat down beside her, trying to keep the conversation calm. It's not just the bracelet, Karen. It's what's behind all of this. You said you were desperate. Desperate for what? She stiffened, then looked down at her hands, as if trying to find the right words. After a long silence, she spoke quietly, her voice shaky. It's not what you think, Evelyn. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I never meant for it to get this far. I leaned forward, watching her closely. Then why take the bracelet? Why sell it? Karen hesitated for a moment, then finally met my gaze. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of fear and regret. Jason and we've been struggling. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd be disappointed. But we're in debt, Evelyn. A lot of debt. And Jason doesn't know. I've been hiding it from him, trying to fix it on my own. I thought if I sold a few things, maybe we could get back on our feet. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Debt? Why didn't you come to me? I would have helped you, Karen. You don't have to hide this from me. She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to burden anyone, especially Jason. He's been under enough stress with work. I thought I could fix it myself. I didn't think anyone would notice the bracelet missing, and if they did, I'd just pay it back. But then I got scared. What if I couldn't fix it in time? I could see the shame in her eyes, the weight of the secret she'd been carrying. But it didn't excuse what she had done. She had made a choice to deceive everyone, including Jason. The trust between us had been broken. And though I understood the pressure she had been under, I couldn't ignore the damage. I can't say I'm not disappointed, Karen, I said, my voice steady. You could have come to me. We could have figured this out together. I know, she whispered, looking down at her hands. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I never meant for any of this to happen. We sat there in silence for a few moments, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. I wanted to be angry, but instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, the truth was out, and I understood why Karen had done what she did, but understanding didn't mean forgiveness. Not yet. Not until I knew how this would affect the rest of the family. I'm going to have to tell Jason, you know that, right? I said softly, her eyes widened in panic. Please, Evelyn. I'll tell him myself. I don't want him to find out this way. I nodded slowly. You should. He's your husband. He deserves to know. I stood up, giving her one last look. I'll be around if you need anything. But you have to be honest with him, Karen. No more secrets. As I walked back to my car, I felt a mix of emotions. The betrayal still stung, but I also felt a glimmer of hope that Karen might finally come clean. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to rebuild what had been broken, but I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. For any of us, the next few days were a blur of emotions and decisions I never thought I'd have to make. Karen promised to talk to Jason, but something inside me told me that wouldn't be enough. I could see how torn she was, but I knew the real challenge would come when Jason found out the truth. That was a conversation I wasn't ready to be a part of. As much as I wanted to keep my family together, I also knew I couldn't let this go unchecked. Karen's actions had consequences, and though I wasn't looking for revenge, I needed to protect myself. The idea of Karen continuing to live in this web of lies didn't sit right with me. And I had to find a way to ensure she wouldn't cross that line again. I decided to consult someone who could give me guidance, my friend and trusted attorney, Bill. Bill had been a family friend for years, handling legal matters for us whenever we needed help. He'd seen me through some tough times, and I knew he would be honest with me about what to do next. That afternoon, I called him to set up an appointment. Evelyn, of course, I'll make time for you, he said when I explained the situation. You've always been straightforward with me. Let's get together tomorrow. I think we need to talk about your options. The next day, I drove to his office, a modest brick building just off Main Street. The walls were lined with old books, and there was the comforting scent of leather-bound volumes and paper. Bill greeted me with his usual calm demeanor. A man in his mid-60s who'd seen a lot in his time. We sat down at his desk. And I laid out everything I knew, the missing bracelet, Karen's confession, and the receipt. As I spoke, Bill listened carefully, his eyes never leaving mine, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Well, Evelyn, I can tell you one thing for sure," he said. "You've got a case, but it's not just about the bracelet anymore. What Karen did, taking something that wasn't hers and selling it, that's theft. It's a serious breach of trust. But the real issue here is the bigger picture, the family dynamic." I nodded, not quite sure where this was going. "What do you mean, Bill?" I asked. Bill steepled his fingers and gave me a serious look. "What Karen did affects more than just you and the jewelry. It affects your relationship with Jason, and potentially the whole family. Jason might feel betrayed by her actions, but if you intervene in the wrong way, it could come back to bite you. You're going to have to decide whether or not you want to make this a legal matter." I swallowed hard. "So, you're saying I have to choose between keeping things quiet or going public with it?" He nodded. "Essentially. You could file a formal complaint, but if you do, it might bring a lot of attention to your family. It might even cause a rift between you and Jason. On the other hand, if you don't act on it, there's a chance Karen could try something like this again, and you'd have no way to stop her." I felt a knot in my stomach. "I'm not looking to tear my family apart, Bill. But I can't just let this slide. I have to protect myself." Bill gave me a sympathetic smile. "You're right, Evelyn. And that's why we need to talk about your legal options. You could press charges for theft, but there's also the option of pursuing a civil case. That way, you don't involve the police, but you still have some recourse." I leaned forward, trying to absorb everything he was saying. "What would a civil case look like?" Bill took out a piece of paper and jotted down a few notes. "It would involve proving that Karen took the jewelry without your consent and that it was sold without your permission. If you go this route, you could potentially get the bracelet returned, or at least the value of it. But the bigger question is, what do you want to achieve?" I was silent for a moment, turning over his words in my head. The thought of going to court made my stomach turn. I didn't want to drag Jason into a mess, but I also knew I couldn't let Karen think there were no consequences for what she did. "I don't want this to be ugly, Bill," I said quietly. "I just want to make sure she doesn't do it again. I want to protect myself." Bill nodded. "I understand. And that's a reasonable request. If it were me, I'd suggest giving Karen one last chance to come clean to Jason. After that, we can explore legal options, but I think it's important for Jason to hear the truth from her first. If she's willing to be honest, maybe there's a way to resolve this without things getting worse." I sat back in my chair, the weight of the decision pressing on my shoulders. I'd always tried to be the peacemaker, the one who held things together. But this time, I realized I couldn't just sweep things under the rug. The truth needed to come out, and I needed to make sure I was ready for whatever came next. "All right," I said, my voice steady. "I'll give her one last chance to tell Jason. But if she doesn't, I'll be ready to take the next step." Bill smiled. "That's the right choice, Evelyn. You've got this." As I left his office, I felt a sense of clarity that I hadn't had in days. I still didn't know what the future held for my family, but I was ready to face it. I had to believe that in the end, doing what was right would bring peace, even if it meant making some tough choices along the way. The days after my meeting with Bill felt like a waiting game. Karen had promised to talk to Jason, but every time I thought about it, my stomach would twist in knots. I wasn't sure what she would say when she finally confessed the truth. Would Jason be angry? Would he feel betrayed by both her and me? I couldn't predict how he'd react, but I knew that it would change everything. I decided to give Karen a little time to do the right thing. I didn't want to rush her, and I wasn't sure how much time she needed to gather her courage. But with each passing day, the weight of it all grew heavier on my heart. Then, one afternoon, as I was sitting on my porch, I got a call. It was Jason. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over? Now?" My heart skipped a beat. There was no mistaking it, this was it. He knew. My mind raced as I quickly grabbed my coat and left the house, my thoughts scattered and frantic. What had Karen told him? What had she confessed? When I arrived at their house, Jason was waiting for me by the front door. His face was grim, his eyes searching mine as I stepped inside. "Jason," I said softly, unsure of what to expect. "Come on in," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk about Karen." I followed him into the living room, where Karen was sitting on the couch, her eyes red, her face drawn. She didn't look up as I sat down beside her. There was a tension in the room, a heaviness that none of us knew how to handle. Jason took a deep breath, his hands clasped in front of him. "Mom, I know about the bracelet. Karen told me everything." I looked at Karen, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. She seemed small, almost defeated, and I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. But it didn't change what she had done. I didn't want you to find out like this, Jason, Karen said quietly, finally speaking. But I couldn't keep lying to you. Evelyn knows everything. I sold the bracelet. I've been trying to cover up the debt, trying to fix everything on my own. I'm so sorry. Jason was silent for a long moment, his face a mix of anger and hurt. I could see the disbelief in his eyes, and I knew that the truth, no matter how long it had been hidden, was cutting him deeply. I can't believe you did this, Karen, he said finally, his voice shaking with emotion. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you ask for help? I was ashamed, Karen whispered, tears beginning to fall. I didn't want to burden you. I thought I could fix it on my own. But I was wrong. I'm sorry, Jason. I never meant to hurt you. Jason looked at her, his expression hardening. And what about Mom? You took something from her, something that meant a lot to her. Why? You didn't think she'd notice? I don't know what I was thinking, Karen said, her voice breaking. I was desperate. I didn't think it would go this far. I could see how much pain Karen was in, but I couldn't let my guard down. Desperation doesn't excuse stealing, Karen, I said quietly, my voice steady. You didn't just hurt me, you hurt this whole family. And I can't let that slide. Jason finally turned to me, his eyes full of questions. Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you just come to me with this? I met his gaze, my heart heavy. I didn't want to tear the family apart, Jason. I thought Karen would come clean on her own. But when I saw what was happening, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Jason was silent, his emotions clearly at war with each other. After a long pause, he looked back at Karen, his voice softening. I don't know what to say to you right now. I'm hurt, Karen. But I need to know if you're really going to change, if you're going to take responsibility for what you've done. Karen nodded, wiping her eyes. I'll do whatever it takes, Jason. I've already started working with a credit counselor to fix our finances. I'll make things right, I promise. Jason was still quiet, processing everything. Then he turned to me, his face etched with both frustration and relief. Mom, I don't know how we fix this. I really don't. But I want to try. I nodded, though my heart ached for both of them. We'll get through this, Jason. It won't be easy. But if you both face the truth, maybe there's still hope. We sat there for a long time. The silence between us heavy with the weight of everything that had been said. But it wasn't a silence of defeat. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, heavy and uncomfortable. But with a chance of something better on the horizon, after a while. Jason looked at me and Karen, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I don't know how we rebuild trust, but I know one thing, we're going to try. Together. I could see the resolve in his eyes. And for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, we could begin to heal. The days following that conversation were some of the hardest I've ever faced. We were all living under the same roof, together but apart. Jason and Karen tried to put on a brave face, but it was obvious that things weren't the same. There was an unspoken distance between them, a chasm created by lies and betrayal that couldn't be easily bridged. I tried to stay out of it as much as possible, but it was hard. I could hear the arguments, the strained silence, the awkward pauses at the dinner table. Every time I walked into a room, it felt like the air was thick with unspoken words and unhealed wounds. Jason had always been my rock, my son who I could count on, and now I saw him struggling in a way I'd never seen before. He was hurt, angry, but above all, confused. One evening, after dinner, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, sipping my tea and staring out at the fading light of the sunset. It had been a long day, and I was exhausted. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, some resolution, some sign that things would get better. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. I glanced at the clock. It was late for anyone to be stopping by. My first thought was that it might be Jason's cousin, who had stopped by once or twice to check in on us. But when I opened the door, I was taken aback. It was Bill, my lawyer, standing there with a solemn expression on his face. Bill? I said, a little surprised. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you, Evelyn, he said, stepping past me and into the living room. I wasn't sure how to bring this up, but I think it's time you know. My heart skipped a beat. Something about the way he said that, his serious tone, set my nerves on edge. What's going on? I asked, closing the door behind him and sitting down on the couch. Bill hesitated, then spoke, his voice measured. Evelyn, I've been doing some digging into Karen's situation. You've been patient with her, but there are some things you need to know. I sat up straighter, my mind racing. What do you mean? Is there more to this than what she's already confessed? Bill nodded. I found out that the debts Karen mentioned, well, they're worse than she led you to believe. Much worse. I felt a wave of dread settle over me. What are you talking about? Karen has been hiding financial problems for years, he continued, his voice low. And it's not just about the pawned bracelet. She's been using credit cards and loans without telling Jason. There's a mountain of debt, Evelyn. And it's going to take a lot more than a few counseling sessions to fix it. I was stunned. I had no idea. Why didn't she tell Jason? Why didn't she come to me? Why keep it hidden? Bill's face softened. She was afraid, Evelyn. Afraid of what might happen if Jason found out. But now, it's all coming to light. And it's going to cause a serious strain on their marriage. You need to prepare for that. I swallowed hard. Is there anything we can do? Any way to fix this before it tears them apart? Bill hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not sure. I've suggested that she be upfront with Jason about everything. But the damage has already been done. Trust, once broken, is very hard to rebuild. I sat back, my mind swirling with everything he'd just told me. I couldn't understand why Karen hadn't been honest with Jason from the start. If she had just trusted him, maybe they could have faced this together. Instead, her secrets were now poisoning their relationship, and there was no easy way to undo the damage. I don't know what to do, Bill, I admitted. I want to help them, but I'm not sure how. You've already done more than most people would, Evelyn, he said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Sometimes, it's just about giving people the space they need to work through things. Jason and Karen have a lot of hard decisions ahead of them. But you can't carry the weight of their problems alone. I nodded, his words sinking in. I know. But I don't want to see them fall apart. I don't want to see them lose everything over this. Bill stood up, a solemn look in his eyes. You can't stop them from making their own choices, Evelyn. But you can still be there for them. And sometimes, that's all you can do. I watched as he left, his words echoing in my mind. I had always been the one to try and fix everything, to make sure everyone was happy. But some things were beyond my control, beyond anyone's control. And as much as I wanted to save my family from this heartbreak, I knew the real work had to come from within. Jason and Karen would have to find their way on their own. All I could do was be there to help them pick up the pieces when the time came, but as I sat there in the quiet house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about Karen's mistakes. It was about trust. And trust, once broken, was something that couldn't be easily repaired. I woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The conversations over the past week had left me emotionally drained, but they had also given me clarity. Karen and Jason were facing the aftermath of her betrayal, but I had to start focusing on myself. The truth was out, the damage had been done. And while I couldn't undo everything, I could start to regain control of my own life. The thought of sitting back and waiting for things to resolve themselves made my skin crawl. I had spent too many years waiting for other people to make decisions, to handle their messes. But this time, I was going to take action. I sat at the kitchen table with my cup of coffee, thinking about what Bill had said, the truth about Karen's financial situation. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that she had lied about it for so long, or the realization that Jason had no idea just how deep the hole went. I couldn't help but feel for him. But I also had to acknowledge the damage Karen had done to me personally. The missing bracelet was just the surface. It wasn't just about that piece of jewelry, it was about trust, betrayal, and feeling like I wasn't enough of a priority to be included in her struggles. I needed a plan. A way to regain my sense of self-worth and dignity. I decided to take the day for myself. I hadn't done that in years. My life had always revolved around caring for others, my children, my husband, my family. But now, I had to take some time to care for Evelyn. I wasn't going to let myself be consumed by everyone else's problems anymore. The first thing I did was drive to the local bank and check on my own accounts. I hadn't thought much about my finances in a while, relying mostly on my Social Security and some small savings. But I realized, if I was going to take control of my life, I needed to ensure my own security was in place. The world was unpredictable, and I needed to make sure I wasn't putting all my eggs in one basket. After making sure everything was in order, I drove over to the local garden center. Gardening had always been my escape. It was something I could do alone, something that gave me peace. I spent hours picking out new plants, planning what I'd do with them in my backyard. As I wandered through the aisles of flowers, I felt something shift inside me. I felt like I was starting to bloom again. I wasn't just Evelyn the mother, the grandmother, the wife, I was Evelyn. A woman who still had dreams, passions, and the ability to take control of her future. By the time I got home, my hands were full of new flowers and plants. I spent the afternoon planting them, carefully placing each one in its new home, imagining how the garden would look in a few months. There was something therapeutic about it, about creating something beautiful, about seeing the results of my own hard work. It was as I was planting the final row of flowers that Jason came outside. He had that look on his face, the one that said he needed to talk. "Mom," he began, standing at the gate of the backyard. "Can we talk?" I wiped my hands on the towel I had hanging from my waist and nodded. "Of course. Come on in." He sat down beside me on the porch, his eyes heavy with everything that had been weighing on him. "I've been thinking about everything," he said slowly. "About Karen, about what happened. I'm not sure where to go from here." I gave him a soft smile. "I know, Jason. It's a lot to take in. But you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, you've got family here. We'll figure it out." Jason was silent for a moment, and I could tell he was struggling. "I don't know if I can ever look at Karen the same way again. She broke my trust, Mom. And that's not something you get back easily." I nodded, understanding his pain. "I know. But sometimes, the hardest thing is realizing that even the people you love make mistakes. The question is, do you want to try and rebuild? Not just the marriage, but your own peace of mind." Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I really don't." I placed a hand on his. "It's not easy, sweetheart. Trust, once it's broken, takes time to rebuild. You have to decide if that's something you're willing to do. But whatever you decide, remember that you don't have to carry this burden alone. You've got people who love you." Jason looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thanks, Mom. I guess I just need to figure out what I really want." I smiled, proud of him. "Take your time. And remember, you don't have to have all the answers right now." After he left to give me some space, I stood by the garden, looking at all the flowers I'd planted. The colors, the variety, the life that was beginning to grow, everything felt fresh and new. I wasn't going to let this one mistake define me. I had my own life to live, my own dreams to fulfill. I wasn't going to be anyone's second choice anymore, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking back control of my own future. It had been a few weeks since that afternoon in the garden with Jason, and a lot had changed. Things between him and Karen were still strained, but they were talking, really talking, in a way they hadn't for years. I didn't know what the future held for their marriage, but I saw hope. Jason was willing to try, and Karen was finally being honest about the mess she had created. But for me, it wasn't just about the marriage anymore. It was about me, about finding peace in my own life after everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the secrets, it all felt like a weight that had been lifted, one small piece at a time. Every conversation, every step forward, had been part of my own healing process. I spent the next few days quietly reflecting on everything. I had given Karen space to come clean, and she had done that. Jason was still uncertain about what to do next, but he was willing to give her a chance. And while it was difficult to watch their struggle, I knew that this was something they had to work through themselves. I had done everything I could to support them, but then, one afternoon, I received a call from Bill. He had been helping me with some legal matters related to the situation. And I knew this call was important. "Evelyn," he began, his voice steady but serious. "I have an update for you. I think it's time to bring this to a close. But before we do, I want to make sure you understand the final steps." I listened closely as he explained that I had the option to file a civil claim against Karen for the theft of my bracelet. It was an opportunity for me to be compensated for the loss, but it wasn't just about money. It was about sending a message about the importance of respect, of boundaries, and of the value of trust. "You don't have to do this, Evelyn," Bill said. "But if you choose to, it's your right. And you've been patient long enough. Sometimes, justice isn't about revenge. It's about doing what's right." I thought about it long and hard. The decision wasn't easy, but I knew I needed closure. It wasn't just about the bracelet, it was about my own sense of justice, my own dignity. I had let Karen's actions go unchecked for too long, and while I had forgiven her in my heart, I had to hold her accountable for what she had done. I want to move forward, I said firmly, my decision made. I'm ready to press the claim. Bill guided me through the process, making sure I understood every step. He filed the necessary paperwork, and I prepared myself for the next phase. I didn't know how Karen would respond, but I was ready. A few weeks later, we had our day in court. The process wasn't as dramatic as I'd imagined. It was straightforward, and Karen admitted her actions, acknowledging that she had taken the bracelet without my permission. She apologized, and though it wasn't the grand gesture I'd hoped for, it was enough. She was willing to make amends, and that meant something. The judge ruled in my favor. I was awarded compensation for the bracelet and given a formal acknowledgement that Karen had been in the wrong. It wasn't a huge victory, it wasn't even about the money, but it was about standing up for myself. About showing that I wasn't willing to let anyone take advantage of me. The days following the court decision were filled with mixed emotions. I had done what I needed to do, but now it was time to focus on healing. Jason called me that evening to thank me for everything. He said that he respected the decision I'd made, and he hoped that it would bring some kind of resolution for both him and Karen. It's not easy, Mom, he said quietly. But I think we're getting there. Slowly. Maybe this will be the turning point for us. I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. Take it one day at a time, Jason. You're stronger than you think. As I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the way I'd envisioned it, but I had done what was right. I had taken back my power, stood up for what I believed in, and come out stronger on the other side. And in that moment, I knew that justice had been served, not just in the courtroom, but in my heart. The days that followed the court ruling were filled with quiet reflection. Jason and Karen were still finding their way, one step at a time. Their marriage wasn't magically fixed, but they were trying, really trying. And that was all I could ask for. Sometimes, the hardest thing is knowing when to step back and let others find their own way. I had given them the space to do that, and while it wasn't easy to watch, I had to trust that they would figure it out in time. As for me, I felt different. Stronger. More at peace. The weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the secrets, the pain, had finally lifted. It wasn't gone completely, but it no longer held the same power over me. I had stood up for myself. I had taken control of my life and my decisions. And I had made sure that the truth came to light. No matter how uncomfortable it was. One morning, as I sat in my favorite chair by the window, sipping my tea and watching the world go by, I realized that I had learned something through all of this. Something I hadn't fully understood before. It wasn't just about forgiveness or justice. It was about knowing my worth. About not letting anyone, even family, diminish who I was. I had been too willing to hide behind my role as a mother and a grandmother, always putting everyone else's needs first. But now, I understood that I had a right to stand up for myself, to protect what was mine, and to demand respect. The truth had been painful, but it had also set me free. And that freedom, I realized, was something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I decided to write a letter to Jason and Karen, something I had been thinking about for a while. I wanted to remind them, and myself, that this wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what we learned and how we grew from it. To my dear Jason and Karen, I want you to know that no matter where this journey takes us, I am proud of the steps you're both taking. There will always be challenges, always moments when you question everything. But remember this, family isn't about perfection. It's about standing by each other, even when things are hard, even when trust is broken, and even when the road ahead looks uncertain. I believe in both of you, and I believe in the strength of your love. Whatever the future holds, know that I am here for you. Always love. Mommy sealed the envelope and set it on the table, knowing I would send it soon. It was time to let go of the past and look forward to the future, one step at a time. As I sat back, looking at the letter, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The lessons I had learned, the importance of self-respect, the power of truth, and the need to stand up for what's right, would stay with me for the rest of my life. And so, I move forward, not as the woman I once was, but as the woman I've become. Stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever comes next. If you've learned anything from my story, I hope it's this: never let anyone take away what's yours. Stand up for yourself and know your worth. Life will throw its challenges at you, but it's how you rise from them that defines who you are. And remember, even in the hardest moments, you are never alone. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means everything to me.